Welcome to the REKAP Room. I'm Michael Kaplan, founder of the REKAP Group here in Chicago. This is where renters become buyers, buyers become investors, and average decisions turn into long-term wealth. No fluff, no hype, just strategy. Let's get into it. Welcome back to episode, I don't even know, I'm losing count, of the REKAP. Can you hear me?
Yeah, 41.
41. Oh, perfect. See, this is, I don't just pay Pat for nothing. I don't just pay Pat to sit here and look pretty. I pay him. He's like my Jamie from Joe Rogan. He's like, oh, it's 41. So on episode 41 of the REKAP Room podcast. And today, today's March 2nd. So just to kind of give you an idea of where we are, because I know these episodes come out usually a few weeks later or days later. But we are in the throes of the spring market. The spring market starts earlier and earlier every year, it feels like. I honestly feel like when people say, oh, the spring market starts in February, I think every year it starts a week earlier, to the point where right after the new year hits, everything takes off like a rocket ship, and it's just absolutely bonanzas. And bananas. I don't even know what I'm saying right now. I'm getting tongue twisted. But it's dependent on where you are, like where you're listening to. This is a Chicago-specific podcast. This is about the Chicago real estate market. I know there's a lot of people who listen to this who maybe aren't in Chicago, so a lot of this stuff won't pertain to you. But in Chicago, what we're seeing right now is very unique compared to a lot of the rest of the country. There's places where you go to Florida, you go to Texas, you go to some of these regions that really took off during COVID where everybody was moving to, that have kind of flipped, right? Where they were a very, very strong seller's market, and now they've become a very strong buyer's market. Chicago, by and large, right now, and at least in a lot of the markets that we work, is a seller's market. I'll give you a perfect example. I was just in Florida a couple days ago visiting my parents. Client went and saw a place, and it was listed for $685, listed for a few days. We offered $731,000 to be specific, all cash. And as is everything, didn't get the place. And that's like commonplace. I mean, I just talking to an agent friend yesterday. She's like, I'm just getting tired of writing offers $100K over ask, and I'm not getting accepted. And that's just the reality of where the market is. So I thought, what better time to make a podcast of value talking about how to win a multiple offer situation? How do you compete in this market where you feel like, and it's honestly for rentals too, where you're going up against bidders where they're just bidding over the asking price and they're doing all these crazy things to get a place. And it's like, how do you win those, and how do you do it in a way that is smart so you're not jeopardizing yourself and putting yourself at unnecessary risk? Because ultimately this is a large purchase for most people. Buying a house, buying real estate is the largest purchase they're going to make in their entire life. So if you decide, hey, I want to buy a house, I'm not saying now is not the time to do it. I'm not saying now is the time to do it. But if you have made that decision and you're going to get into this market, you have to know and equip yourself with the tools to get there. So let's get into this. The standard contract when you go to submit an offer has a few different what's called contingencies in there. I call them levers because they're really just levers that you can pull to varying degrees depending on how aggressive you want to be. And not all of them, like I think there's a misconception that it's always the purchase price. That's the biggest thing. Everybody cares about the purchase price. And that is true. That's usually the most important. So we'll start off that as item one, how to win in a multiple offer situation. You have to offer more money. Most of the time, the seller, their most important thing is getting the most money. Coming out at the end of it, netting the most money. And yes, there are other things in the contract that we're going to go over that you can do to make your offer more attractive. But ultimately, for a lot of these sellers, like I said, it's a money game. I've never come across a seller who is willing to take less money, all terms being the same. So ultimately, you have to be able to stomach jumping up a little bit in purchase price. And if you're buying with a loan, one thing I recommend is just look at the numbers side by side with your lender from a monthly payment basis. One thing we do with all of our clients is before we go and submit an offer, I'll have the lender run the numbers at this price, that price, and then the highest price that they would offer. And then you can see like, wait, I'm only paying an extra $100 a month to jump my offer $25,000 or $20,000. And a lot of times people are like, I'm willing to do that. That extra $100 a month isn't, it's not going to change my life. And I'd rather just get this place and lock it down over that as opposed to looking at it as the huge lump sum of $25,000. So purchase price, number one thing that you can do to win a multiple offer, increase your purchase price. Make sure you give yourself the strongest chance to win at that. Second thing is earnest money. So if you don't know what earnest money is it's essentially it's a good faith deposit to the sellers that you're putting X amount up in collateral. There's no standard amount for it, but we see, I would say a very strong earnest money deposit would be somewhere around 5% of the purchase price. And that money is held in a third-party account during the time that you're under contract and all the whole buying process is underway. And that money is credited back to you at closing. So whatever you would bring to the closing table for your down payment and closing costs would be less whatever your earnest money deposit is. And I always recommend clients in multiple offer situations, put the most amount down that you can in earnest money. Because in the state of Illinois, getting earnest money held, the seller's retaining your earnest money in the state of Illinois is practically impossible, because the logic behind earnest money is it's collateral, right? It's, okay, I'm the buyer, I'm putting this money up as collateral in case to show the seller, hey, I really want to buy your property, I'm willing to put this money up. And the theory is that if the deal falls apart, right, then the seller can keep that money because they took the property off the market. Now all of a sudden that's a liability to the seller, and it's probably going to end up costing them money down the line, because now all those other buyers that are in the pool are going to see that it fell out of contract, and they're going to be like, what's wrong with it? Why did it fall out of contract? Even if there was multiple offers, the 3 other people who offered might have already moved on to the next place. They might have gotten a place themselves already. So the seller's removing it from the market time. That is the collateral for them. But with that being said, like I was saying earlier, in the state of Illinois, the seller's retaining that earnest money. The only way they can do that is if you're being negligent and not staying within the contingencies that you have allotted in the contract. So, for example, in the first 5 business days, you have a full attorney review process. Let's say you have an inspection and the inspection goes haywire and it's more than you bargained for. Even in an as-is deal, you can back out and retain your earnest money. If you have a financing contingency, which we'll go over that in a little bit, let's say you can't get financing on the building or on the property, you can back out and retain your earnest money. Let's say you're buying a condo and you want to know what's going on in the condominium, HOA, the financial side of the actual building, to make sure you're buying into a building that's not run like an absolute garbage truck. And you find out that the financials of the building that you're buying in are not good. You back out, you retain your earnest money. So my point being is that there are so many backstops and provisions in the contract that as a buyer in a multiple offer situation, putting down a large earnest money deposit is great for you, because to the seller, it looks to them like, hey, this buyer's got a lot of money liquid. We know they've got good financials that they could put up 100, 200, 300 grand in earnest money. And for you as the buyer, it's relatively low risk, especially in the state of Illinois. I know attorneys that have been doing this longer than I've been alive, and they've had maybe, 1 or 2 experiences where the sellers will retain their earnest money. And those only happen in situations where, like, let's say you're buying a place and the day before closing, you just decide to go on a vacation for 6 weeks and not tell anybody and not answer your phone. Well, the seller is going to retain your earnest money then. But as long as you're staying within your contingency periods and making sure you're hitting your deadlines, and we're, as the real estate agent and the real estate attorney and your whole team, that when you come to work with us, we're going to kind of make sure that you know what you're getting into and what those deadlines actually are. So that's my advice. Put a large earnest money deposit down. Next thing you can do is, so within the inspection kind of realm of the contract, there's a few options you could do. So you can do no inspection at all, right? You can do inspection as is, or you can do an inspection not as is. So let's go through what all those mean. And those, essentially, there are 3 options that are varying degrees of protection to you and protection to the seller. So the first would be no inspection at all. Obviously, that would be the most protection to the seller, because you're not going to have an opportunity to inspect the place and look at it with a professional inspector, because that's where, by and large, a lot of deals fall out of contract. I don't want to say most, because I think it depends if it's a condo or a single-family home, but a lot of deals fall apart during the inspection process. And so if you're waiving your right to do an inspection, it's a great vote of confidence to the seller, but you are obviously going in without an inspection. I would never recommend, you'll never hear me recommend to a client to say, hey, you should waive your inspection on this. I will simply state that if we are in a true multiple offer situation, right, where there's multiple offer, like maybe not even a true multiple offer situation. I'm talking something that's crazy competitive, 15, 20, 30 offers, right? And it's a condo. That's the only time I would really ever say I'd be comfortable even saying like, okay, this is fine doing, right, is waiving your inspection on a condo. Because when you think about it, when you're buying into a condo, so much of the things that go wrong in real estate are not things that are within the four walls of your unit. It's things like the roof, the foundation, basements, if you have basements, exterior like maintenance, so brickwork and siding and all those different things. If you're buying into an HOA, though the HOA is taking care of that. You're in a condo, and if you're buying a condo, you're only concerned about what's in the four walls of that unit. And a lot of that you can figure out, not all of it, not 100% of the time, but you can figure out a pretty good idea of what's going on and how well maintained it's been just from a pretty good eye test. And so we have had clients waive their inspection completely to win a place. It happened, the most recent one was last summer, condo in Wicker Park. And I think it was listed around $550. Our offer, I don't remember the exact number, but it was all cash in the 600s. And that no inspection won us the deal. And to my knowledge, there hasn't been any major issues with the condo since they've bought it. Because when you're buying into a condo building, like I said, there's kind of limited amount that can go wrong. But as a first-time buyer, I would never say, no, don't waive an inspection, or yes, you should waive an inspection. Don't get an inspection. I feel like that peace of mind is important, and I would never want to be put in a position where a year down the line the buyer comes to me and be like, oh, you told me not to have an inspection and now all these things went wrong. That's not my business, but it is there, and it is in the contract and something that you can deploy. Now, what most people do, most people will not be comfortable waiving an inspection, so you're kind of left with two options. Do you go in as is with an inspection or not as is with an inspection? As is simply means you're buying the property in as is condition. That's all it means. So you could still have an inspection. You can still back out of the deal if the inspection's not to your standard or if there's too much than you bargained for, and retain your earnest money. But what it does is it says we're just doing this inspection for our knowledge, so we know what we're getting ourselves into. And I personally, there's very few times where we write offers in this market where they're not as is. It's kind of like just a standard thing at this point. Not 100% of the time, but a lot of the time we see properties going like, if you're in a multiple offer and you're not submitting as is, like you're putting yourself at a severe disadvantage. And again, it's one of those things kind of like the earnest money where where it's like, you're not putting yourself at a tremendous amount of risk by doing it, right? You're still able to have your inspection, but ultimately you're not going to be going through the inspection report and asking the sellers to fix this and credit for that and do this and do that before closing. You're just, again, buying it as is. And so that is why we see it deployed so many times, and it's the reason why it's one of the most common things that we see on offer contracts in today's market. And the last one would be just a standard non-as-is with inspection. So that means you would have an inspection on the place. You're able to ask for things to be credited for and fixed by the seller. And I'll just say, with all that being said, right, like even in a non-as-is deal, so a fully contingent inspection with request deal, you're not going to be able to, you can ask for anything to be fixed, but the seller's not going to be fixing, especially if there's multiple offers. They're not going to be going through that inspection report if you're asking for them to fix an outlet that's loose and fix a light bulb that's burnt out and a loose door handle and all these things. They're not going to be fixing that anyways, right? That's kind of my philosophy on it and why I always recommend in these multiple offer situations to go in as is, because even if you're not as is, there's no guarantee the seller is going to fix it. So might as well give yourself that upper hand and give yourself a chance, a dying chance at it. And again, it doesn't put you at that much more risk per se in terms of getting out of the deal and being able to retain your earnest money. The next thing under what would be called, I guess, the financing wing of the contract and levers that you can deploy to win your multiple offer situation is there's a few options there. Kind of similar how in the inspection side, there were 3 options. There's kind of 3 main options when it comes to financing. So the first is you could just buy it cash with no financing allowed. That means you just have that cash and you want to buy the place. Not too many people are in that position, but we see a lot of cash buyers in this market, and we see a lot of people whose parents have money and buy their kids' places in cash. And so obviously that is going to be the strongest offer you can make in a multiple offer situation is you have that cash and you can buy the place cash. Because now, again, another huge reason why deals fall out of contract is financing issues. The buyer can't obtain financing on the property. The property's not able, you can't obtain financing on the whole building, whatever those things may arise. And if you have the cash lying around and you show the seller you're going to buy this thing in cash, it's a very, very strong chance that, or give yourself a much better chance that you're going to get this offer accepted. So, but, right, you have to have that money in cash to make that offer. And most people don't have $500, $600, $1 million, $2 million laying around, so they have to obtain a mortgage. And so there's really 2 main options when it comes to getting a mortgage as to what you can do in the offer contract. And the first would be a full financing contingency. So that would mean this offer is contingent on your ability to get financing on the building, and for whatever reason, or on the unit, I should say. And if for whatever reason you can't get financing and can't get your mortgage in time, you can back out of the deal, retain your earnest money, no harm, no foul. Obviously, the seller would have to go back on market. Sellers don't love this, right? Because of that reason. You have the full contingency. You have the ability to back out, retain your earnest money, and there's nothing they could really do about that, and nothing that keeps you on the hook. And that contingency extends all the way usually until 5 business days before closing. So you can get all the way through this process and right at almost close to the finish line, not be able to get financing, and the deal falls apart. Now the seller has to go back to market. Obviously, they wouldn't want that. So the next thing you can do with a mortgage is called cash mortgage allowed, right? This is essentially waiving your finance contingency, but you are still allowed to obtain a mortgage. And so, again, it just is waiving your finance contingency, but it allows you as somebody who's buying with a mortgage to compete against cash offers, because both deals, whether it's a true cash offer or cash mortgage allowed, you're not contingent on getting financing. If you can't get financing, you have to buy the place in cash. The risk with that comes, you have to buy that place in cash. I cannot for the life of me understand how people will waive their financing contingency without having the cash there to buy the place. Because let's say, God forbid, you can't obtain financing on the unit and you waive your financing contingency. You did cash mortgage allowed. You now have to buy that place in cash, or the seller's going to retain your earnest money and potentially sue you, right? That's a problem. That's a real problem. And if your agent doesn't explain that to you up front, is just like, oh, waive your financing contingency so we could compete against these multiple offers and then just get financing later. Sure, that sounds great in theory, but you need to make sure you have that cash on hand to truly close this deal out if you can't get financing. So as much as I would love to recommend every client go in cash mortgage allowed so they can compete with cash offers in these multiple offer situations, it would make my life a lot easier, so then we can truly compete against them, right? Because if it's a cash offer versus a fully contingent mortgage offer, all things considered, even if the mortgage offer is a little bit higher, that cash offer looks a lot stronger. So I'd love to say to my buyers, hey, go in cash mortgage allowed, let's compete with the cash offer, and you still can get a mortgage. But God forbid you can't get a loan in time. I mean, you're SOL. There's nothing you can do at that point, and you're gonna either have to buy the place in cash and figure out how to get that money, or they're gonna keep your earnest money, which could be upwards of as much. I mean, it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So that is kind of the general gist of what you can do on the financing side of things. And within the full financing contingency, there are things that you can do to make that more attractive, right? Let's say you have a full financing contingency. You don't have the cash aside to do full cash offer or cash mortgage allowed, and you want to give yourself the best crack at it. Well, my advice is get fully approved don't get pre-approved, get fully approved by a lender. There's a big difference. It's not enough to get pre-approved in today's market. You have to go through the full underwriting process with your lender before you start searching. So what that means is they're going to look through all your tax returns, your documents, your debts, your income, your all those different things, and make sure you're fully underwritten all the way up until the time you find a place. And that means that the deal can close a lot sooner, right? You can close a lot quicker because they've done a lot of the legwork up front. And two, the only things left for that loan officer to get that loan closed have nothing to do with you. You've essentially told the seller by having this full approval that my lender has ran everything about me individually and my finances. This deal will not get hung up on my side of the financials of this mortgage. It's the only reason this deal can get hung up on financing would be if there's an issue with the building being able to get financing, right? Because there's kind of two sides to that coin when you get a mortgage, especially on a condo building, is they're looking at not only you, right, your financials and your ability to qualify, but a lot of these buildings, especially ever since this building collapsed in Surfside, Florida a few years ago, which was pretty much avoidable had the building stayed up with maintenance and been able, and raise their HOA fees over time to deal with the maintenance, to deal with those different things that caused the structural issues that eventually led to that terrible tragedy happening in Florida. The government and lending bodies, whatever, have become a lot more stringent on buildings that they lend on. So if for whatever reason there's some structural issues or things that are raising red flags, it's going to pop up in the lender's system, and they're not going to be able to give you a standard loan on it. They're either going to have to do some weird product on it, or they're going to have to just say, we can't loan to you on this building because there's too many issues with it. So those are just good things to note. And what you also can do on top of getting fully approved is what's called appraisal coverage or appraisal waiver or appraisal gap. They all kind of mean the same thing. So essentially what this is, when you buy a place with a mortgage, right, the bank's going to want to make sure that the loan that they're giving you on this property and the value of the property is worth what you're paying. The bank thinks it's worth what you're paying, right? Let's say the property's worth $500,000 and you offer $1 million. The bank's not going to be like, okay, here's a loan for that. They want to make sure it's a sound loan that they're giving. So they're going to hire a third-party company to go out there and do what's called an appraisal. They're going to go through the place, look at the comparables in the area, and then come out with an appraisal that says, we think the property's worth X amount. If the property appraises for more than what you paid, great. You just won yourself some free equity. You're starting off day one on a very strong foot. If the property appraises at the purchase price, the bank says it's worth $500, you offered $500. No harm, no foul. Feel like everybody's on the same page here. And most of the time, that's what ends up happening. The property appraises for what you paid. It happens, I don't know what percentage of the time, but most of the time, that's what ends up happening. The only time there's issues, and it's usually in multiple offer situations, is when people are offering a lot of times over asking price. So let's say it's listed for $500, you offer $550, the bank says it's worth $525. So now you've got a $25,000 appraisal gap. In a full financing contingency, you have the ability to back out of that offer or renegotiate. But what you can do to kind of sweeten up your offer without completely waiving your financing contingency is waiving your appraisal contingency. So it's kind of like a portion of that financing contingency. And what that says is if there is a gap between the appraised value and the price that I'm paying, I will cover that at closing. You just have to bring that money to the table. You could take it, so you just have to bring that, essentially that gap, that $25,000 gap in this example, between $525 and $550, you're bringing that gap to the table at closing. This is something that if you want to compete with cash offers or you want to compete with people waiving their financing contingency, you have to have an appraisal coverage in there, especially if you're going over asking price, especially if you're in a multiple offer situation. I know it's not fun. I know it puts you at a little bit more risk, but that's just the reality of the situation, right? We're not in a normal market. We're in a market where the sellers have the whole deck of cards, and you need to be willing to do what it takes to put yourself at as much of advantage as you can. Because the reality is, when you are looking for properties, the seller has all the leverage and you have none, right? The second you go under contract, that whole power dynamic shifts. Now you have the cards and the seller doesn't, because in the state of Illinois, you can back out of that contract for a lot of different reasons and still retain your earnest money, and the seller can't do anything about it. So they want to make sure that they're accepting an offer that, yes, is the highest purchase price, that, yes, is going to net them the most amount of money, but also making sure that the offer that they're accepting is a strong, ironclad, the buyer's serious, the buyer's qualified, the buyer's ready to move through. And that's why every time that we submit an offer for every single one of our buyer clients, our lender calls the selling agent, says, hey, we've ran the client's financials, we've got them fully approved, we've ran everything, and they're as strong can be. That's why we call the listing agent, to explain that every single buyer that we take out, we will not take them on a single showing unless we've done an hour-long buyer consultation with them, explaining what the market is, explaining what the contract terms are, so they don't go under contract and that's the first time we're explaining these terms to them, and now all of a sudden they get cold feet and back out. Because again, if you back out of that deal, now the seller has to go back to market. People are going to be like, what's wrong with the property? They're probably going to end up taking a haircut on price because of that. And so, if you want to win in this market, you have to put yourself in the seller's shoes, right? You have to put yourself in the position of, I'm selling this place. A lot of times there's a lot of emotions involved. There's a lot of intangibles. These sellers, residential real estate is not investment real estate typically. You're dealing usually on the other end with just normal people, right? It could be a couple, right? Let's say the couple just had a kid and they need to move to the suburbs, and the kid's getting started in school, another kid's on the way, blah, like all these different life things are going on, and now all of a sudden they're putting their property on the market to a buyer who's wishy-washy. That's going to cause a lot of stress, because a lot of times they need to sell their place to go buy the new one to get their kid in the school for the timing of the new school the new school season to start. So again, always put yourself in the seller's shoes when you're in these situations, and what can we do to take their pain points and check off every single one. Okay, obviously we know the purchase price is going to be important because everybody likes more money. Let's make sure we offer them a great purchase price. If we can offer more earnest money, let's put the biggest earnest money deposit down that we can. In terms of inspection items, if we can do as is, no requests, let's do as is, no requests. I think it's a pretty safe bet on a lot of types. Again, it doesn't put you at a lot of risk. I will always preface everything by saying it is ultimately your decision. I'm not the one who's going to have to live with the consequences of the things that you do. I'm just going to tell you straight up what I think is the best decision to make and what the consequences of those decisions are. But again, as is, no requests, very few offers I'm writing in today's market don't have that term in the contract. If you're cool waiving your inspection completely, that's your prerogative. Like I said earlier, I'm never going to say for sure waive your inspection. You don't need to do it, because I don't want to deal with a year in, 2 years in, you call me and say this place is falling apart and you told me not to do an inspection. I'll never say that. But if you want to roll those dice and you want to give yourself the best chance of getting this place, you say, Michael, I need to have this place. There's no way I cannot have this place. This place is mine. Well, that's an option, right? It's there. I'm not going to hide it from you. Financing. As we said, if you have a mortgage, you have two options. You can waive your financing contingency, or you can have a full financing contingency. But even if you have a full financing contingency, you have to do something with the appraisal. You're going to have to waive you're going to probably have to waive it, or you do what's called gap coverage, which is another thing I didn't go over. But that's basically saying, like, let's say, for example, my example of listed for 500, you offered 550, it appraises for 525. There's a $25,000 gap. If you have gap coverage, what that does is you can negotiate into the contract a gap coverage of $5,000, $10,000, whatever, where you say, I will pay up to a certain amount, but not over if the appraisal comes in low. So let's say there's a $25,000 gap. You say you put gap coverage up to $10,000. You would only be responsible to bring $10,000 to the table, and that other, that the other side of that, they would have to either come down in purchase price or bring that cash to the table on the sell side. So those are the main things that you can do to win a multiple offer situation. But the last thing I'll say is that you have to work with an agent and a team that is knowledgeable about this contract and knows how to truly navigate it and what all the things mean and what the true fallout and potential risks and rewards to all these things are, because there's so many things that we could talk about on a podcast or we could talk about in person, but there's so many intricacies that I won't go over with you because that's not your job, right? You don't go to the doctor and expect the doctor to teach you how to be a doctor because that's what you're going to them for. You don't come to me as a real estate agent expecting me to teach you about how to be a real estate agent. That's why you hire me. And so I don't go in through, this is pretty granular information, but there's so much more and so much deeper information we can get into and so many things that we do on the back end to make the offer stronger without putting you at any more risk than you need to be or than you're really comfortable with. And so, and a lot of that comes to do with timing and, not like simple things. You get the condo docs back and you're still waiting on a few things to be buttoned up. So you ask a few more questions to get that period drawn out so you have a little bit longer to close. Like there's just so many different things that we do on the back end that are very case specific and not applicable to everybody, but they are important. And that is why you just need to have trust in your agent and trust in the team that they know what they're doing and they have won these situations. Like when you're interviewing agents in this market, talk to them about what are they going to do to win multiple offer situations? Like what's their experience in that, right? Because a lot of agents, especially if you're working with somebody who works in a different market and they're buying, like let's say you're working with an agent who's your mom's agent from the suburbs and you're buying a condo in Lincoln Park, right? Those markets are completely different. And the dynamics of those two things and the nuances that come along with those transactions are completely different. So if you are working with an agent in a specific area, you say, what is your experience with multiple offer situations in this specific market? And if they don't have experience working through that and they don't have experience explaining to you and can explain to you in clear terms what all these things mean and what you'll have to do to win the place, ultimately, you're doing a disservice to yourself, because all that's going to happen is you're either going to win a place and get cold feet or be in over your head, or you're just going to keep losing. And you're going to keep losing. And you're going to be like, what is going on? Why? Like, I want to get a place, but my agent just, like, what are we doing wrong? And that's when, and we get a lot of clients where we're their second or third agent because they've been working with all these different agents before and they just can't land the place. They get beat out. They don't know how to win. And in today's market, you need people who know how to win and who understand all the nuances and intricacies that come along with that. So that is today's episode. If you are interested in learning more about how to buy specifically in today's market in Chicago or sell, reach out to us. We're happy to jump on a call. Like I said earlier, we spend an hour with every single buyer up front to explain this whole process start to finish in a very clearly defined set of terms. And that is, to me, the biggest reason why our clients win, because they're not seeing this information the first time when they're out in the field. So many people, they reach out to their agent, the agent sets them up on a search, and they're going touring the next day. If there's a place that you need to see tomorrow, yes, we'll get you in. But 99.9% of the time, we need to be ultimately drawing it out and making it so you are doing all the work up front. And it's not the first time you're seeing the contract, right, like when you're going out and searching for properties. So that's all I got for you today. See you in about a month. Like I said, we're at March 2nd, so next time we'll be in April. I'll be closing on my condo April 7th. Big news, little life news for me. I'm gonna be a West Loop boy, so if you see me in the neighborhood, don't be shy. Don't be shy. And as always, love ya.